Hi everyone, my name is Corrine Perry, and this is my Assignment 1 presentation for Info 281 Metadata through San Jose State University's eCampus Digital Asset and Services Certificate Program on creating a metadata scheme for biological collection taxonomy. It's Darwin and Dublin Core. Discover the foundation. It's not what you have, but what you do with it that matters. Darwin Core is a body of standards for biodiversity informatics. It provides stable terms of vocabularies for sharing biodiversity data. Darwin Core is maintained by TDWG, Biodiversity Information Standards, formerly the International Working Group on Taxonomic Databases. Simple Darwin Core is a method of cataloging taxonomic records across a wide variety of biodiversity applications. The structure contains information about the item's name, place, and any events of any biological occurrences and importance on Earth. Simple Darwin Core contains simple rows and columns for its information, considered attributes with their corresponding values, fields, or records. The structure is also considered simple because it has a limited amount of required attributes, in perhaps comparison to other metadata cataloging schemes like Dublin Core. There's also some flexibility in the information contained in each field or record, so that any combination of fields could be shared in order to present meaningful information about a finding. In other words, there are not necessarily predetermined legal values for a given field. This then provides for flexibility in the information inputted into each field, with minimal restrictions. Darwin Core records or fields could be shared via text or XML files, with the option to then export into CSV format. Creating a simple spreadsheet is a viable way to store the information. Darwin Core provides a standard for understanding global patterns of biodiversity in order to improve interoperability. There are simple and relational Darwin Core, but in this presentation we will focus primarily on the simple version. Creating a standard to document and classify biodiversity helps us to better understand species distributions and environmental changes influenced by these species interactions, species habitats, and their changes. In order to address the global biodiversity loss concern, access to high-quality data regarding spatial, temporal occurrences of species and their relation to the environment has resulted in the development of Darwin Core. Through documentation of biodiversity changes, scientists and other researchers can then observe how climate change and other anthropogenic environmental changes are impacting species' existence and biodiversity on a global scale. By understanding biodiversity changes, sustainable policies could then be implemented and further developed. A brief history of how Darwin Core emerged is that it began in 1999 or the 1990s and went through several iterations of different variants over the next 2 decades. The origins came from academic societies primarily, documenting and cataloging specimens in natural history collections. This standard for cataloging was established on paper and later on computer databases for ease of access and usability. Entity relationship models were becoming widely accepted, and normalized database structure enforced data integrity. The first widely acceptable biodiversity domain was a species analyst. Darwin Core was established to exchange geographic and temporal occurrence information regarding organisms in the natural world. It laid the foundation for the research community to create a loose federation of databases on this topic matter, and to then enhance data integration through advanced research methods. Darwin Core derives from previous standards, including Dublin Core, but focuses on organismal and taxonomic characteristics of biodiversity. At the core, you'll see here, you will find geological context, taxon, organism information, and location of the species. Extensions then exist from this core to identify different metadata schemes that connect. You could find Apple Core for specifically vascular plant specimens, genetic resources extension, paleontology in the bottom right, and Dublin Core in the bottom left. Dublin Core is a set of metadata elements. Its purpose is to create records according to a simple standard, MARC catalogs the material that was once on card catalogs in libraries. Dublin Core catalogs as digital objects, image collections, and similarly related materials. Dublin Core conforms to RDF, which is Resource Description Framework standards. These metadata schemes help to make library materials discoverable and usable for patrons by complying with a known and acceptable standard. The Dublin Core DC model includes resource, description, and vocabulary. There are 15 levels in simple DC of fields for document input and control, including title, creator, subject, and description. Dublin Core does for digital objects and images what Darwin Core does for species biodiversity and taxonomic classification. There are 8 required Darwin Core terms that need to be included in a Darwin Core record. These 8 terms include occurrence ID, event date, decimal longitude, decimal latitude, scientific name ID, occurrence status, and basis of record. Scientific name should be at the lowest possible taxonomic rank at the species level or lower. We want to be able to track the record back to the original dataset. Including information about how identification was made is generally helpful, including with the ID key or species guide. And decimal latitude and decimal longitude are the geographic latitude and longitude for a location, using the spatial reference system of the geodetic datum. The decimal places should account for the level of uncertainty. The name of the place could be provided in locality, and layers, coordinates, geocoding, and location could all be included to identify the place of the species. This record is from the International Wolf Center data regarding the species Canis lupus or gray wolf and its taxonomic classification structure. The information for the species classification is linked in the Darwin Core for scientific name ID, accepted name usage ID, original name usage ID, name according to ID, and the name published in ID. This site provides information on the species classification structure, including kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. The second portion of the Darwin Core scheme includes the higher classification taxonomy from again Animalia, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. The scientific name for the gray wolf is again Canis lupus. Canis is a genus and lupus is a species classification. Generally, this is what could be found in a sample Darwin Core record. The standard is loosely flexible to accommodate different technical formats in which it is found. Spreadsheets, relational database fields, XML schemas and documents, non-SQL data stores, and semantic web resources are just a few examples. The standard needs to be able to adapt to changing needs of researchers. Darwin Core accommodates growth and interoperability. Darwin Core makes recommendations about constraints on data content. Darwin Core is community-driven. It follows the Darwin Core namespace policy for receiving community feedback on its development. There is a public forum where the public can provide their comments directly. Some discussions result in a consensus for change, which then follows the outline process for submittal and includes a 30-day public review process. These are identifiable strains for utilizing Darwin Core. And finally, it's also integrated into various research communities. Various research communities for Darwin Core that integrate this method include Nordic Genetic Resource Center and Biodiversity. They have sought to take advantage of Darwin Core on behalf of the European plant genetic resources and gene bank community, and at the same time to share rich discipline-specific genetic resource information regarding this standard and material. Apiary Project extended the Darwin Core to capture basic specimen information along with detailed annotation data found on herbarium sheets. And finally, the Apple Core initiative is aimed at providing guidance on best practices for the content of Darwin Core terms for vascular plant specimens. Again, these are just a few examples. There are many more. And there are also weaknesses, unfortunately. Integration of biodiversity data into the semantic web is still in its early phases and is an ongoing process. There is a lack of well-defined ontology with a formal definition of relationships between terms. In a defined domain, ontology is defined as a relationship between concepts such as biological entities, the events that document where and when they occurred, and the processes to which they are identified as being representative of a taxonomic concept. Ontology would provide for relationships between concepts and properties, connections between biodiversity data, and related semantically rich information. And finally, Darwin Core lacks terms of interest to more specialized groups. An extension of simple Darwin Core would include additional definitional terms with complementary, related domain, or guidance on the use of Darwin Core within a specific subdomain of biodiversity. These are considered known weaknesses for this metadata scheme that provide a basis by which the standard could then be further improved upon and developed. So with this, thank you very much for viewing my introductory presentation on Darwin Core for libraries to catalog biological diversity of species taxonomy. If you have questions, you are welcome to contact me at the source provided here. And this is a list of the references used in today's presentation. Thank you again.